Hi, I'm Naomi Klein.
I'm Rula Jebreal.
And welcome back to Unshocked, a regular segment devoted to keeping our bearings in dizzying times. Today, we're going to get unshocked about those harrowing pro-rape riots in Israel. To do that, we're breaking with our usual format, and I'm joined this week by another Zeteo contributor, my friend Rula Jebreal, Palestinian journalist, filmmaker, and scholar. Rula is a lifelong human rights defender and an expert on sexual violence as a weapon of war. In fact, she teaches a course on the subject. Hi, Rula.
Hi, Naomi.
So we're going to be talking about the impunity that produced these shocking scenes. We're also going to be talking a little bit later on about Kamala Harris and whether or not her tough prosecutor persona is up to taking on this kind of rampant criminality. There's nobody I'd rather talk about it with than you, Rula. And first, we're just going to get people up to speed about what happened in case they weren't paying attention. At the start of this week, 9 Israeli soldiers, reservists, were being held in detention after being accused of gang raping a Palestinian detainee. His injuries were so horrible that he could no longer walk after the gang rape and sought medical attention. When the military police officers arrived to detain the soldiers, they were met with angry crowds who opposed the investigation on principle. Apparently, they thought the soldiers should be free to do as they please, whether torture or rape. The mob stormed the bases, entered the military court building. Let's see some tape of that because it's extraordinary. Now, one of the things that's very important to understand about this is that these are not just people we can dismiss as fringe extremists, though some people are trying to do that. Members of Israel's far-right government have also condemned the investigation into those soldiers, calling it a, quote, affront to their service. We should also say that the fact that these soldiers are being investigated at all did not come easily. Israel really had no choice, because for months, there have been reports leaking out of particularly this notorious makeshift detention facility called Sde Teiman about rampant torture and rape to the point of death. Whistleblowers have come forward, doctors, lawyers, former prisoners, all taking enormous risks to share their testimony with reporters and human rights organizations. This is why Israel's military advocate general was forced to act and detain those reservists for questioning, which is what set off this extraordinary uprising, what can only be called a pro-rape riot. Rula, you have personal connections with this story. You've been hearing about these abuses from people who have spoken directly with prisoners. Tell us what you know.
Thank you, Naomi. And this is such an important conversation, and it is unprecedented because let me start by saying in 20 years, I've been working on this topic, which is gender-based violence, genocide, and basically rape and genocide or genocide and gender, whether it's in Syria, deployed by Assad, or in Ukraine, deployed by Putin, whether studying cases in Rwanda and Bosnia and comparing them. I never seen in my lifetime any entity, any regime, any soldier, or even a mob protesting and raiding military bases, demanding or defending the right of soldiers to rape and use rape as a weapon of war. I never seen anything like this. And I think we can easily say that this is a culmination of years-long dehumanization of Palestinians, disdain for international law and for rules of law, but also you can see clearly a breakdown and total sense of impunity, but also breakdown of every rule of war, but also chain of command. And I would like to emphasize that this is we've known about these cases since December, since multiple doctors, two precisely, Al-Rantiz and Al-Burj. One of them was a doctor from Al-Shifa Hospital, was abducted in December, and then in March was declared dead, was killed in very, very mysterious circumstances. His family and his lawyers and many people who witnessed what happened says that he was sexually abused to the point of death. Another doctor from Al Adwan, Dr. Al-Rantis, his name, and he, again, from northern Gaza, he was abducted and he died in very mysterious circumstances. We have 36 people who died in the last 9 months. Just to compare it to Guantanamo, in 20 years, only 9 prisoners died in custody. Only 9. Compare it to Israel, and especially to this specific facility in outside of Gaza, 36 people dying, and then you have multiple amputation without anesthesia, and then you have accounts of torture. But also they forced prisoners and detainees, including a journalist who is in his mid-20s, to witness rape, to watch other detainees being raped. Soldiers themselves were bragging about what they were doing. And now we reached the moment where the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, pointing to criminal conduct and war crimes in Gaza and elsewhere. So Israel was forced. They didn't want to do it. Just to be clear, this is standard procedure that's been going on for a long time. The United States knew about this. Other European countries knew about it because Palestinians NGO took cases and informed the United States on multiple occasions. How do we know that? Because Josh Paul, who worked in the State Department, testified and told the world at interviews for CNN that he himself read of cases of children who were raped, not in Gaza, not in occupied West Bank, but in East Jerusalem, in a specific detention center that actually I grew up next to. And it's called Al-Maskoubiye Torture Center. So as a child in East Jerusalem, who grew up in East Jerusalem, we knew what was happening in these detention centers. There was a sense of shame, to be honest, about not talking about it and hiding the facts. But sexuality has been weaponized against Palestinians for decades, including against children. And it is now reaching a point where Israeli soldiers, Israeli ministers, and Israeli politicians demanding to protect rapists in the name of self-defense and in the name of racial domination. And I not only I never seen anything like this. This is the country that claimed that sex and rape was used against women as a weapon of war by Hamas. Obviously, the claims are out there and need to be investigated because every survivor, whether it's Palestinian or Israeli, deserves justice. Every woman deserves justice. They don't want vengeance. They want justice. And the only way to shed light in what really happened is by allowing an international investigation to thoroughly, independently, impartially investigate and hold to account these perpetrators. The fact that Israel took these rapists and start investigating them, and then immediately you could see the debate in the government, in the parliament, where basically the question was of the day was, well, is rape allowed, or is rape is a legitimate tool of warfare? And many politicians said, yes, it is.
I'm getting up and I'm leaving here, and I'm not going to vote on anything anymore until this story and this insanity that there is someone in the prosecutor's office who thinks that it is possible to come and arrest soldiers for things they are doing to the Nakba terrorists is not over. To insert a stick in a person's rectum, is that legitimate? Shut up. Yes, if he is a Nakba, everything is legitimate to do. Everything. That's what I wanted to know. Do you know what these people did?
And it sent shockwave around the country, but I think it sent validated to the Palestinians that we reached a level in the genocide that it's not only extermination and starvation and mass killing and annihilation. It's now about erasing your own identity and dignity through rape of men and women alike, children and adults alike. And this level of criminality has been enabled by the United States and by Congress, who applauded Bibi Netanyahu recently.
Rula, there's a lot that I want to pick up on and follow up on in what you just said. One of the things you're talking about is a transition from a sort of a state of like where everyone knows, but there's still some deniability, right?
Yes.
And And I think that that was the case before October 7th. And now we're in a new chapter. And, and I've also covered different, what I would describe as torture regimes, whether it's the military juntas in Latin America, when I was writing the shock doctrine, the network of so-called black sites under the Bush administration. And there is always this kind of, it's a nod and a wink, right? Because torture is always mass communication. You want people to know because it's part of how you discipline a population. You want the warning, but you also want the plausible deniability in the face of international courts. And so there is a level of secrecy that has to coexist with that. There's a reason they released the photos from Guantanamo, right? That was mass communication to the world, but they're also denying that torture is happening. They're also rewriting the laws. What we've seen with these pro-rape riots are, I think, of a piece with justifying the bombing of hospitals, the kidnapping of doctors into these facilities, mobs stopping humanitarian aid, saying, no, let them starve, right? And this is what is really, I think, something that I agree we haven't seen before. In India, there have been pro-rape riots. I would make a distinction that this is a government-run facility. These are soldiers, and this is the involvement of politicians. So there's elements of this that we've seen before, but this particular combination, I think to me, it's extraordinary that this is not. I know there's a lot of news in the United States, but as you mentioned, Netanyahu was just applauded by Congress. It's extraordinary how little this is making the news. You also talked about the role of using sexual violence as a weapon to spread shame, also to humiliate, also to blackmail. This is something you've written about your whole life. I actually rewatched your extraordinary film Miral last night ahead of this conversation. This has been present since the Nakba. So I would love to hear you just talk more about the story that brings us to this really moral cataclysm.
As I wrote in my book, Miral, but also in the movie, I grew up in an orphanage that was established immediately after the Nakba in 1948, actually immediately after the massacre of Deir Yassin. And somebody who grew up by and was raised by women who actually the survivors of those massacres, who were my teachers, my mentors, all of these women talked explicitly about the use of rape as a weapon of war in multiple occasions, whether in villages like Deir Yassin or Tantur and others. But it shook me when I heard it from them. I understood the trauma, and I wanted to process the experience and think and understand if it was a one-off, until I saw documentaries where Israeli soldiers who fought in 1948 and belonged to the Irgun and the Haganah and other Israeli terrorist organizations and underground militias literally bragging about how they watched rape and raped women and girls and men. And it was obvious that these two testimonies from rapists and from the victims came together. Then I grew up, obviously, I was living in East Jerusalem during the first Intifada. And I remember one of the tools was rounding up children at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. I mean, I remember in 88, 89, the army would come to our neighborhood where I went to visit my dad in the Muslim quarter in East Jerusalem. And they would round out hundreds of people, especially children. They basically will abduct those children. And they will bring them to Al-Maskubiya, the famous notorious torture center. We all heard the stories because many boys, 13, 14, 15, 10, 9, whatever, they all would go back, and some of them would have to be hospitalized. And they would have to be hospitalized because they were basically, they insert in their rectum objects. So when I read the story when I read the report about this notorious torture center, rape center, of how they would rape these men, it was this story I know very well, because these are the same story I heard from Palestinian boys in East Jerusalem. This policy has been normalized now to the extent that there are now promoting the policy as a legitimate tool of war. Mm-hmm. And you can see that they were shocked, these soldiers, that they were getting arrested or even interrogated, because probably they blamed their commanders and they blamed the state. It was like, you told us these are subhuman. Why are you blaming us now? You told us that we are allowed to for our vendetta. I mean, some of these soldiers that were interviewed, they were saying that they raped Palestinians, not because they were Hamas militant. They were admitting that they were regular Palestinians, but they want to exact vengeance. Yeah. They want vendetta against all Palestinians. And it reminded me of also something that I heard in Rwanda and Bosnia of survivors, where they said, you know, they were raping one person to humiliate the whole village, the whole tribe, the whole community, the whole family, to destroy them and break them. And, you know, as I wrote in my book, I am the daughter of a woman who was raped herself and ended up committing suicide because she was denied justice. You know, so rape survivors are people who were denied justice twice over. They were brutalized, terrorized twice over by the rapist himself, by society that denies them justice. When I watched those mob riots, I realized that imagine for the psyche of a nation that's been humiliated by knowing that our men and boys and our people were raped, but also by a society that riots in favor, in solidarity with rapists. Not only were denied justice, they are basically affirming their right to rape and plunder and destroy and to basically obliterate those Palestinians who will have a long way to heal. And I don't know how they can heal in a context where the state itself decided to investigate these criminals. And I want to just quote Halevi, which is the spokesperson for the army, said, we're doing this to protect ourselves and basically to protect the state and some soldiers when they travel abroad because of the ICC. He is admitting he's not doing this because he believes rape is wrong and criminal. Mm-hmm. He's saying explicitly they are doing this because they're forced to do it. And we know how every investigation ended in Israel. Nothing. It takes years. Somebody probably will be convicted for a couple of months, but then they will leave as national heroes because this is the byproduct of total criminalization and dehumanization of Palestinians, but also making Israeli society believe they are above international law, that they deserve impunity for whatever crime they commit.
And it's also a byproduct of the attempts to animalize Palestinians, yes, the exaggerations and reenactments around October 7th, where it was, yes, sort of, you know, it's what I call re-traumatization, yes, as opposed to a real investigation. The point of it was to create maximum sort of trauma, re-triggering Holocaust memories that are, you know, so embedded in Israeli education and in Jewish education in the diaspora, to say, you know, this is who Palestinians are. This is what they want to do to us.
You start talking about the language that was used, not seeing them even as human, but also the President of Israel himself. There's no innocent civilians. I mean, all the quotes of those leaders. Yeah, I mean, this is what paved the way to what we're watching now.
It's an entire nation out there that is responsible. It's not true. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved, it's absolutely not true.
And those soldiers interviewed yesterday by Channel 13, they kept saying, well, like, why you're blaming us? You right. told us. You right. they actually said
Gaza is a free shooting range, and these prisons are a free everything range. Like they truly don't understand why suddenly they're supposed to.
Exactly. And again, when President Herzog goes to the Olympic, basically he's cited by the ICJ as his quote about there's no innocent civilian, a whole nation is guilty. Mm-hmm. And he's cited by ICJ in the charge of genocide. Then he's received like a national hero at the Olympics in Paris. That's the moment where the rape basically mob was happening. It's like, if he can get away with it, why can't we?
You and I really agree that rape must be condemned in all circumstances.
Absolutely.
And it has been very difficult to have honest conversations about sexual violence since October 7th, because the Israeli military immediately weaponized allegations of mass rape by Hamas as part of their justification for genocide. There isn't justification for either rape or genocide. And we also know that they lied, exaggerated. Many of those lies were echoed in the media, but that doesn't mean that no rapes occurred. And as you said, we need that credible investigation, not having it folded into state propaganda, whipping up these revenge furies. And I think part of what we are seeing here is the result of that. If you frame, if you create this context, people are going to believe they have the right to revenge, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in these prisons. How are you navigating this sort of landmine, right? Because it has become very, very hard to have an honest conversation, and yet we have to have these honest conversations. There are huge double standards about. I'm wondering where's Sheryl Sandberg and everybody else who was screaming at the global feminist community for not condemning October 7th, on the terms that they wanted, and what are they saying about these pro-rape riots? Rula.
I think Gaza and Palestine and everything that happened post October 7th, the genocide, starvation, mass killing, decimation, annihilation, and now mass rape, it just exposes it's a litmus test, but also exposes so many in Western liberal democracy and where they stand in the question of universality of human rights and human right, and basically international legality. So if you condemn human right violation and perpetrators of war crimes and rapists only when the enemy commits them, you really don't believe in human rights and international law. And that's where we should all stand, that regardless who the perpetrator is, they need to be investigations and they need to be held accountable. I supported actually a major investigation into the Syrian regime because they were using rape as a weapon of war. I myself went to Beirut and went inside Syria to document some of these atrocities for the New York Times of all publications. I went to Jerablus, Bab al-Shams, went to the refugee camps in Lebanon, in Beirut, and also in Turkey, interviewed tons of survivors. All of them clearly talked about rape being used as a weapon of war. It was a matter of policy. The Syrian regime denied it, and that's why we needed an independent, impartial UN investigation. In the case of Ukraine, it became clear what they were doing, the Russians. They were replicating the policies they did in Syria. In the case of Rwanda and Bosnia, it was a watershed moment in the case of both Rwanda and Bosnia, where 50,000 women, Muslim women in Bosnia, were raped systematically and released when they were 9-month pregnant or 8-month pregnant. It was an attempt to re-engineer the DNA to not only break and destroy these women, but also impose your DNA on the other side. And it was clear where the international community need to act. It was the first time in history we saw how rape was clear that, the international legislators decided that rape is a weapon of war and they need to hold these perpetrators accountable, but also the people who order it. We saw in Yugoslavia with Milosevic and Mladic and many others. In the case of Israel always denied these allegations. How do we know that? Because every time there was a determination that somebody was raped, they would go after lawyers, family, and they would actually shut down any investigation, going to as far as declaring the NGO who was helping the survivors as a terrorist entity and a terrorist organization. They were terrified of the rule of law. What we are watching today is actually a fascist mob that is so emboldened that's saying we don't care about democracy anymore. We don't care about legality anymore. We don't care about the US Leahy law. What we want is vengeance. What we want is fascism. And in total honesty, I fear that what we are watching is not only the annihilation of Palestinians, a destruction of what the resemblance, what the myth of the state of Israel, because now the trauma is playing itself out in clear way, where criminality and depravity, people are proud and bragging about it. I never seen a body of soldiers filming themselves committing these crimes, commenting and boasting about it to their friends and their allies. And I never seen the international community total indifferent to that. Or, where if we want to address also how we have this election in the United States, and the issue of rape and starvation as a weapon of war and annihilation is not even being discussed in this election campaign in the United States.
Yeah, and we really are at this precipice where the international human rights architecture can't withstand this level of hypocrisy, can't withstand this level of double standards, where we're talking about between around the double standards of sexual violence, whether it's inflicted against a Palestinian or an Israeli. It's mirrored on the world stage, right? As you were saying, I mean, whether it's Russia or whether it's Israel. And the whole principle of international humanitarian law, it's never been applied fairly, but the principle is that it applies to everyone. It isn't just about choosing a team. It's about committing to a principle. And so here we are in the US with a new presidential candidate for the Democrats, who's positioning herself as a kind of a top cop, who is making it central to her message that she's prosecuted sexual predators. Donald Trump, has the track record that he has. And people are eating it up. But how does this actually hold in the context of this global crisis of faith in international law, the cataclysm that we're seeing, the moral cataclysm that we've witnessed in Israel and in Gaza? Where is Kamala Harris, the prosecutor, in the face of this collapsing international law? One of the things that I worry about is that this is what the United States does. There is a track record. When a crisis becomes too deep for the Democrats to withstand, they do these kind of, sorry to say, a little bit of cosmetic changes. And that was the kind of Obama moment where the U.S. responded to September 11th with a bipartisan commitment to violating all of these international laws that we have been discussing, attempting to legalize torture, illegal invasion of Iraq, and people wanted change. And it wasn't going to be Hillary Clinton. It was Barack Obama, who opposed the war and came in with all the hope and the change and being a first, and yet didn't close Guantanamo, didn't hold anybody accountable for the invasion of Iraq, for lying the U.S. into war. Eventually says in 2014, we tortured some folks. Doesn't change the head of the CIA.
In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, we did some things that were wrong. We did a whole lot of things that were right, but we tortured some folks.
This has an effect because it's Trump who harvests the fact that people know that something is profoundly broken, and it isn't just the lack of accountability on the wars. It's also Wall Street that never faces accountability, and it's Trump who harvests that. So here we are in another moment where you can really feel the relief among a lot of these Democrats of like, okay, we don't have to carry Biden anymore. They think that a new face and a new message, we're not going back, is going to win the election. And maybe it will, but this idea, America is this like do-over nation, right? Like they always want to reboot and not look back. And I'm all for not going back when it comes to reproductive rights, when it comes to the good stuff that we don't want to go back on. But this message that of the Obama era of we can't look back on the crimes, we can't look back on the torture, we can't have the reckoning on race that was promised during the election. Maybe the Democrats win the election with this, but it won't last long. You can't put off these reckonings forever. And I think it's a very dangerous moment. What are you thinking about what Harris?
I actually totally agree. And think the lack of accountability for war crimes during the war on terror actually delivered Trump. He actually campaigned, and the fact that the deep state is rotten and criminal, and many people believed it, not because it was a conspiracy theories, because many people who destroyed their lives. I mean, thousands of Americans died during the war on terror. 40,000 were injured. Whether we want to add to that, you had major crises that wrecked democracy, that really destabilized democracy, whether it's 2008 economic crisis and never holding accountable, actually, those guys who wrecked the economy, and those who wrecked international legality by trying to legislate around torture and extrajudicial killing, which is killing, mass killing of other people, including killing of American citizens overseas. I mean, I think I don't know if Democrats learned the lessons that delivered them Trump, but I know if they don't now seize the opportunity to affirm with Kamala Harris, who is running as Lady Justice, right? The woman who understands who these criminals are, those perpetrators. If you cannot affirm the principle of international legality, and that is universal and should be applied universally on everybody, and if you continue business as usual where, well, we absolve our allies, but we condemn our enemies, that doesn't work. Fascism is the handmaiden of those hypocrisies and double standards. And we need to be clear about this. And if we look back at Europe and the crisis that happens in Europe that delivered fascism, literally delivered fascism, was not only propaganda and was not only the economic crisis, was the inability of the elites to hold accountable those people who committed serious and brazen war crimes and crimes against humanity. And I think the attempt to do that, the whole narrative about never again was not never again for the fast. We don't wait. Justice can be delivered for the dead, but can still be delivered for the living. What I mean by that there's a lot of people who, especially if we understand international repercussions, and I think what's happening in Gaza will have terrible repercussions globally. It's already happening. Countries all over the world will use Gaza as the exception to commit what they claim as their exception to humanitarian law and international law, and will dismantle the whole infrastructure. And Kamala Harris and Democrats who claim, no, we need that because we need rule-based international order, cannot in good faith, with credibility, state that they are the arbiters and they are the defender of those principles, because you cannot defend liberal democracy while ignoring that you are, in the meantime, arming, bestowing diplomatic protection and political protection on a government that is considered rogue by the international community, considered, viewed as committing genocide and war crimes and crimes against humanity. When Ben-Gvir yesterday, not only yesterday, the Minister of National Security of Israel, I think weeks after, when he was asked about these torture centers, and he said, oh yeah, of course we're doing this. Of course we're torturing these people. And if you're not happy with our torture, I have a formula for you. We can actually kill them because and he went on to say, the justification for mass killings of detainees or Palestinian hostages for him was, well, if you're not happy as international, observers that we are putting 20,000 prisoners in small spaces without, access to hygienic products, without access to food, torturing them and raping them. If you're not happy, we can enact capital punishment and kill them as a solution. I mean, there's endless depravity. And if you don't hold and draw a straight line and a red line, there's no end to the kind of fascism that will be unleashed in Israel and beyond Israel.
Now, this is the thing about impunity, is that it's not a stable force. I've described it as kind of like an oil spill. Once it's out, it just spreads, it infects everything. Everywhere. And this is the moment that we're in. It would be nice if Harris meant it about defending some kind of a rules-based order. We need that. And I think if I could end on one message, it's that she doesn't have to just be satisfied with the symbolism. There are concrete things that she can do. It can inform who she chooses as her VP pick, yes. And she can put the questions of sending weapons to Israel on the table, because that is the most yes. important. The rest of it is words. If you're still sending them bombs, the rest of it is words. Yes, she's expressed more empathy for Palestinians than Biden has in 10 months, but in the end, we don't need a vibe shift, right? We actually need a very serious policy shift, which is what you've been talking about. The problem.
And if I may add, after my last conversation with Mahdi Achi about this thing, some of Harris' surrogate reached out to me to say, how can we communicate and talk to the Muslim and Palestinian community in a way that can bring them back to the fold? I said, it's not a question of communication and rhetoric. It's a question of substance. If Kamala really believes in America's law and upholding America's law, there's a Leahy law. There's America's law that prevent America from transferring any weapons to any military unit, to any army that is violating human rights. They're admitting to doing so. They're filming themselves doing so. So she could uphold America's Leahy law. And their answer was, we will try. We need more popular support to do that, because there is a faction in the Democratic Party that truly believe that Israel is the exception to international legality. And I think these factions need to be named and shamed and need to be understanding that what they are enabling is fascism in Israel, is pro-mob rallies, and also the Ben Gvir. They're empowering the Ben Gvir.
And fascism at home, because everybody's trading technologies. You know, Donald Trump is out there saying that he wants the United States to have the very best Iron Dome, just like Israel. He was inspired for the idea for the wall. He also said credited with Israel. So these technologies, this impunity, it spreads everywhere. These figures inspire one another. Next time we talk, Rula, we have to talk about Giorgia Meloni. We have to talk about European fascism, the role of hypermasculinity in all of these projects, injured masculinity, trying to regain that masculinity through force, through dominance. That's at the heart of this, which is why I believe that it's really only feminists who are going to save us. We haven't solved global fascism in this conversation, but we're working on it. And that's all from Unshocked for now. Rula, thank you so much.
Thank you, Naomi.
I appreciate it so much.